Hi, I'm Tom Biebighauser, owner of Wetland Restoration and Training. Thanks for joining us today. We are at the Fort Ancient Earthworks and Nature Preserve. This is located in Oregonia, Ohio, and this is operated by the Ohio History Connection. And this is an amazing place. It's the largest, most well-preserved hilltop enclosure in all of Ohio. Construction began over 2,000 years ago. So why are we here? Well, the construction of the earthworks also included the building of numerous vernal pools that are functioning wetlands, and I can't wait to show you what these look like.
Hello, my name is Bill Kennedy. I am the site manager and site archaeologist for Fort Ancient Earthworks and Nature Preserve here in Oregonia, Ohio. Fort Ancient is operated by the Ohio History Connection. It is one of approximately 58 locations that our organization operates around the state. Fort Ancient is one of the most important archaeological sites that we have in Ohio. It is surprisingly not a fort. It is a ceremonial site. It is an earthwork created approximately 2,000 to 1,600 years ago. It covers over 100 acres and it has many different components, many different parts and elements to it, but the most obvious would be the earthen walls that go around and form the earthwork itself. The earthwork is not a fort, but it was thought to be a fort in the early 1800s. All of these earthworks, though, have a similar function in that these are ceremonial sites that are also the sites of pilgrimages that people are making as part of this religious movement. And when I say pilgrimages, I mean that people are coming from hundreds or even thousands of miles away. Part of the reason why people thought that Fort Ancient was a fort is that in the 19th century, many people did not believe that these mounds and earthworks in Ohio and elsewhere, they didn't believe that they were built by American Indians. They believed in a whole bunch of kind of what we would consider very fringe ideas. Some of those persist to this day.
Now it's time to step outside and to discover these ancient wetlands and how they've survived over 2,000 years. And we're going to identify the many animal species that call them home.
So this is an example of a borrow pit where the dirt was excavated, the soil was excavated from the interior of the walls to be piled up onto the walls right there. And we find evidence of this. There's 3.5 miles of mountains. We find evidence of this every, not an abundance of areas, but a good enough areas. Well, this right here, I would not consider a barrel pit because it's not up against the face of the mound behind us about 20, 30 yards. So natural depression, vernal pond, I would assume. Sometimes native people would create ponds like that for ceremonial purposes. I cannot speak whether this is natural or man-made by ceremonial purposes, but I can tell you it's not a borrow pit for the construction of mounds.
I believe that this was constructed many, many years ago, and how I know that is that the shape and there's this lack of saturated soils coming out from the perimeter. Natural vernal pools generally have gradual slopes, saturated soils coming out, lots of pits and mounds where trees fell over. This has the look of something that people constructed years ago to provide them with water.
Okay. There's also, if you look behind us, there's looks like an outlet going under that
Yes,
bridge
it does.
too. So
An overflow.
an overflow.
And that way you could have rested or lived along the edges and again, not got your feet wet.
The other thing too that's really neat about this particular area, if you look at that blue sign right there, it says Stone Circle. Here at the site, we'll see more when we get to the middle fort, these are archaeological remains of ceremonial circles. We don't know exactly what they're for, but there's one right here, there's one up there. One of the theories that I kind of go with in the middle fort, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but these ceremonial circles would be like gathering spots, like for smaller groups within the sacred circle.
It is very possible that this pond was dug on purpose. How do I know that? It's very deep and it's very large. When we look at the embankment nearby, there's no digging in front of it. All the digging was done here, and the soil must have been carried over to those embankments. The reason being to build something with deeper water. This wetland was built by humans over 2,000 years ago. It's located on a ridge high above the Little Miami River. The wetlands at Fort Ancient were dug by hand using sticks. The soil that was removed, it was carried in baskets to form this large and long berm that encircles the ridge, and this berm is 23 feet high in places. The wetlands at Fort Ancient contain water in the winter and spring, and they dry in the summer and fall. We call these wetlands that dry from time to time vernal ponds or ephemeral wetlands. The wetlands are from 1 to 3 feet deep. They're deepest in the center, and they have gradual slopes around the edges. The basins that form the vernal ponds contain clay that's compacted. Some of the vernal ponds are lined with gravel. The gravel was moved uphill from the Miami River in baskets that were carried by hand. The wetland basins are very firm, and they show that they dry from time to time. This drying allows oxygen and bacteria time to decompose the leaves and branches that fall into the water each year. Trees and shrubs are not growing in these vernal ponds, and this shows that they can hold water long enough so that trees and shrubs will not grow. The vernal ponds are being used by frogs, salamanders, dragonflies, and fingernail clams for breeding.
Would it help that pond out if we cleaned the wood and stuff out of there?
Oh no, oh
Just
no.
leave it be?
Oh, it's good to leave it.
Okay.
Gives all these things places to hide. Yeah, this is, oh, look at this. Yeah, no mosquito larvae, but dragonfly larvae.
Okay.
Spring peepers, possibility of newts, and then we have the dragonfly. We hit 4 species. And there's more, and they come in different. This is really early right now, and so like each week you'll have different species coming in.
Huh.
And then my sampling, my net, the mesh is too large.
Right.
I'm missing things because, like now fairy shrimp. If you ever are out here and you see the color of pink, the pink color in the water, then there's probably a hatch of crustaceans like fairy shrimp. Okay. It'll only happen for 2 or 3 days. The water will look pink. And you go, what's that? Then you can actually see them. Another word for them is sea monkeys. We're going to do some netting in this pond and see what's living beneath the surface. I'm feeling a bit more mud in the bottom of this one, which tells me that it holds water longer. And the organic material is not as decomposed. Okay, we have the chorus frog eggs in here. And I see the clams again, all the small clams. I'm going to try another scoop. Oh, well, there we go. This branch that I brought up, there's all sorts of eggs attached to it, and that's indicative of salamanders laying their eggs. Whereas if they attach them to branches in the water, then that way they will hatch. You're looking at a series of 3 vernal pools. Each one was constructed by hand, and each one is holding water long enough for quite a diversity of frogs and for salamanders to live in them. And what I'm looking at here is a high density of vernal pools here at Fort Ancient, and it's really impressive the amount of habitat that it's providing to amphibians and to invertebrates is just remarkable. In the year 2003, Kendra McLaughlin published a paper. The title of the paper is Plant Cultivation and Forest Clearance by Prehistoric North Americans, Pollen Evidence from Fort Ancient, Ohio. What they did is looked at sediment samples and analyzed them for pollen content, and these were collected from 2 of the vernal pools at Fort Ancient, 2,000-year-old pools at that. They show very high amounts of cultivated plants, especially 3 species. One is sumpweed, the other is knotweed, and the final one is goosefoot. These were being cultivated, so it's very possible that the earthworks at Fort Ancient were under cultivation and that it was not strictly a ceremonial structure. The pollen analysis further shows that the area was deforested. We didn't have very many trees out there. And by modifying this vegetation, people were able to grow the food that they needed to eat. I believe the main reasons the vernal ponds at Fort Ancient have survived this long are the wetlands, they dry annually, and that creates conditions where the leaves and branches that fall in the water are going to decompose and the basins aren't going to fill with muck. Each wetland is surrounded by a very small watershed. This is what we call a catchment. There are no ephemeral, intermittent, or perennial streams or ditches that flow into any of these vernal pond wetlands. The wetlands are based on compacted clay, so water is very slow to soak into the ground. Tree roots aren't able to remove water from the wetlands by growing under the water. The wetlands were not built with dams or water control structures. The overflow or the spillway for each wetland is quite wide. It allows water to leave the wetland in a sheet-like pattern and not cause erosion. The wetlands are located on high ground. They're not on the floodplain or river or stream where they could be filled with soil during a flood. There are no signs that livestock have ever collapsed the banks surrounding the wetlands, and this would have filled them with soil. The wetlands have not been drained or filled with soil for agricultural purposes or to control mosquitoes. The vernal pond wetlands at Fort Ancient Earthworks and the Nature Preserve show it's very possible to build natural appearing and functioning wetlands that can last for thousands of years without the need for maintenance. Billy, this is one of the largest, most beautiful vernal pools that I've seen here. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Oh yes, this is what we call a borrow pit, and they utilize the soil from this area to help build up these earth walls around you.
Have you ever seen any wildlife using this?
At certain times of the year, we've seen deer sometimes, and also wood ducks. Wood ducks also frequent this area.
I'm Tom Biebighauser with Wetland Restoration and Training. Thanks for joining us today. I invite you to share, subscribe, and like this video, and to visit the website for Wetland Restoration and Training. Thank you.